Okay, well here I've got three Retina IIIc cameras, two small C and one big C as it's known. So I thought I'd better tell you the difference between them. This particularly how you go about taking them apart. Right, we'll start with the earliest, which is this camera. Retina IIIc, small C, the most common type you see about the place. Its distinguishing features has a little metal flap over the meter, covers the cell. It's a 2-range meter cell. So you read the scale in two different places depending on whether you've got the flap closed or the flap open. Otherwise, much the same as the other cameras, with the exception of the viewfinder system. You'll notice it has fairly small windows here, and there are no bright lines in the finder for the wide or tele lens. And that's pretty much what distinguishes this model. There were minor production changes over time. This is an early example. You'll see it has the wind lever's got a little shiny dot in the middle. They dropped that feature fairly promptly. This is a very early example, and instead of having the T and arrowhead on the bottom to distinguish between the wide and tele focus scales, it just has two little triangles. They fixed that really quickly too. It has no guard around the film release button on the top, which is another feature that changed later on. That would have been getting bumped fairly frequently and people losing an exposure as a result. There were changes made to the shutters over time. This has a very small catch here which links the diaphragm to the shutter speed ring. It doesn't have an awful lot of tension. In a freshly cleaned camera that doesn't cause you any problem, but if people were to set the scale and then roughly shift their shutter speed, this would have reached the end of its travel fairly promptly and they wouldn't have the exposure that they thought they had. That changed later on. They had a more durable clip here, and they also moved the aperture numbers, which are on the base of the camera, moved to showing at the top. On these early cameras you just got a dot there. So that's what the three small C cameras look like, the first type with the dual range meter. Later on this was the last of the 3Cs. These ones had the same viewfinder system, rangefinder system, small windows, no bright lines for the wide or tele, but the meter was different. And the meter here is this pretty much the same as was used on the later 3 big C models, and it's a single range meter, distinguishable by its plastic surround, black plastic surround around the selenium cell. And this then went on to the 3 big C model, followed this with the changed viewfinder. Like the last of the earlier 3Cs, this has a guard around the film release button, and the shutter, the aperture setting ring here has got quite a strong clip, lot less likely to get disengaged, and it has the aperture numbers visible at the top of the shutter. That's what they look like. The 3 big C, this was the last of the line really. There were 2 variants of these, but don't bother getting into that. This one, single range exposure meter as in the previous camera. Shutter all the same. The difference here is the combined viewfinder rangefinder. This has bright lines visible in the finder for the wide and tele lenses. This is a particularly ugly example. There's a bit of a story to that. It's not what I thought I was buying, but that's life as we know it. So that's the main differences between these models. So if someone says they have a Retina Big C and they're selling it, the distinguishing feature that you need to be watching for are these two big windows here and here, which are quite different to these two windows here and here. People will often try and sell these ones. This is the later type small C with the single range meter. They'll often be trying to sell those off as Retina III Big C, which they most certainly are not, the difference being in that viewfinder system. That's the main points with those. Now I'll get on to something else after that. The Retina small C, 3 small C, you take the top cover off quite differently than you do with the other models. This is quite simple by comparison, so I'll just whip through it now and show you how you go about taking the top cover off. Most notable feature, you do not need to stuff around with the meter dial. That stays on the top cover. It's fixed to the top cover, it's not fixed to the meter underneath. So to be in, open the back of the camera, put a screwdriver through the fork of the rewind, undo the rewind with your fingers, lift off the rewind knob and that little piece there that was busy trying to get away, pop them to one side. We now have 3 screws, 2 at the rewind end on the top. Use a decent screwdriver so you don't mar the screws. 1 on the end of the top plate. And the top cover should lift off, complete, exposing the camera underneath. You can see the exposure meter there, and that's all you need to know about getting into one of those models. It's pretty straightforward. We'll put that to one side. I'll show you the others, and we'll start with this one, Retina III small C, later type, single range meter. The difference here is this. We open the back of the camera, something through the forks of the rewind to stop it turning. That comes off with your fingers. Same deal with the parts, put them to one side. Here it gets different. On this model, as with other models with the single range meter, this dial is fixed through to the meter inside the camera. So that dial has to come off before you make any changes. Now, when you disturb the dial, you'll disturb the setting of the meter. What I normally do is turn this dial fully clockwise until it stops. You can see the 18s at the end there. Now, there's a line visible there on the ASA scale. Make a note of where it falls between these numbers. Typically it'll be somewhere about between 16 and 17. Make a note of that because you're going to need to put it back in the same place or your meter will not read accurately and you have to adjust it. Right, to get into here, you need a tool like this. This is a screwdriver that's had the tip ground away to leave 2 small points to engage that screw. That just undoes. The dial will come off in one piece. There's a few components in there. You can enjoy putting those back together another time. 2 screws on the top at the rewind end. 1 on the right hand end. This part's important. Hold your finger on the top of that meter while you lift the cover off. Otherwise it's inclined to pull the meter up with it, and now depending on the meter, that'll break the housing where it's screwed down here. So putting that back is basically just the reverse of that process. But that's very important. You can see this has the same rangefinder as the earlier 3C. The last of the three I'll show you here is the 3 big C. Same process, open the back, something through the fork of the rewind, spin that off with your fingers, pop that to one side, make a note of where that line on the ASA dial was, and it's between about a third of the way between 18 and 17 there, which is probably not a good sign. Undo that screw, lift off those dials. 2 screws in this, at this end. This is a particularly sad and ugly example of the 3 big C, but it's the only one I happen to have, and it came to me as a trade, and the person described it as being in excellent condition. When it turned up, I discovered it was not only the most worn out Retina big C I'd ever seen, it had pieces broken, but that's another tale. Alright, so that's the inside of the camera. I better get that phone.